What happens when a music legend walks onto one of America's biggest morning shows expecting respect and instead gets ambushed by a host with an agenda? In just 29 seconds, George Stephanopoulos would say something so shocking, so disrespectful, that Chaka Khan would do what no guest had ever done before. Walk off, right there, live on air. And what you're about to hear is exactly how it all fell apart. The Good Morning America studio was buzzing that morning. Chaka Khan, the queen of funk herself, sat across from George Stephanopoulos, with Robin Roberts and Michael Strahan flanking the desk. The lighting was perfect. The cameras were rolling. Everything seemed normal, but something was already off. George started with what seemed like a simple question. Chaka, you've had an incredible career spanning 5 decades, but let's talk about the struggles, the addiction, the failed relationships. Why do you think you couldn't keep it together during your peak years? The studio went quiet. Robin's eyes widened slightly. Michael shifted in his seat. Chaka Khan's smile faded, but she held her composure. Well, George, I think that's a pretty loaded way to start this conversation. I came here to talk about my new album and my tour. George leaned forward, that signature smirk playing on his lips. But isn't that what people really want to know? I mean, you've been arrested, you've been to rehab, multiple times. Doesn't the public deserve to understand why someone with so much talent threw it all away? Threw it all away? Chaka's voice rose slightly. I'm sitting here, still performing, still creating, still selling out shows worldwide. What exactly did I throw away? Robin tried to jump in. George, maybe we should focus on the new music. Chaka, your album has been getting incredible reviews. But George wasn't done. He waved Robin off with his hand, literally dismissing her attempt to redirect. Robin, please, I'm conducting this interview. Chaka, let me ask you this. Do you think your children resented you for choosing your career over being a present mother? The air left the room. Michael Strahan's jaw dropped. Robin Roberts put her hand over her mouth. The crew behind the cameras froze. This wasn't journalism. This was an attack. Chaka Khan sat perfectly still for a moment, her eyes locked on George. When she spoke, her voice was ice cold. Excuse me? You're going to sit there and question my motherhood? On national television? You don't know anything about my relationship with my children. George shrugged, like he was discussing the weather. I'm just asking the questions that our viewers are thinking. You made choices. Those choices had consequences. I'm simply trying to understand the psychology behind someone who puts fame before family. George, come on, man. Michael Strahan finally spoke up, his voice firm. That's crossing a line. That's really crossing a line. George turned to Michael, with irritation clear on his face. Michael, I don't need you to tell me how to do my job. I've been doing this for 30 years. Then act like it. Robin Roberts said quietly, but the microphones picked it up. Every word. George's face reddened. He turned back to Chaka, and what came out of his mouth next would become infamous. Look, Chaka, I think what America needs to hear is an apology. An apology for wasting your gift. An apology for the scandals. An apology for not being the role model that young women needed you to be. Chaka Khan stood up, not suddenly, not dramatically at first. She just stood, slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with George Stephanopoulos. An apology? You want me to apologize? I think it would go a long way toward rehabilitation of your image, George said, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Let me tell you something, George. Chaka's voice was steady, powerful, controlled. I have lived my life authentically. I have made music that has touched millions. I have survived things you couldn't even imagine. I have raised my children with love. I have fought battles you'll never fight. And you think I owe anyone an apology for being human? George opened his mouth to respond, but Chaka wasn't finished. No, you don't get to sit there in your comfortable chair with your privileged life and tell me what I should apologize for. You don't get to reduce 50 years of artistry to tabloid headlines. You don't get to question my motherhood when you know nothing about the sacrifices I've made. Robin Roberts was nodding. Michael Strahan had his arms crossed, clearly on Chaka's side. The studio crew was watching history unfold. George, incredibly, still didn't back down. I'm just doing my job, asking tough questions. Tough questions? Chaka laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tough questions are about politics, about social issues, about things that matter. What you're doing is called disrespect. It's called trying to tear someone down to make yourself feel important. It's called bullying. Now wait just a minute, George started, his voice rising. You can't call me a bully on my own show. Your show? Chaka looked around at Robin and Michael. Last I checked, this was Good Morning America, not the George Stephanopoulos attack hour. Michael Strahan actually laughed at that, a short, surprised bark of laughter that he tried to cover with a cough. But everyone heard it. George's face was now completely red. If you can't handle straightforward questions, then maybe you're not ready for this interview. Straightforward? Chaka's voice was getting louder now. You called me a bad mother. You said I wasted my gift. You demanded I apologize for my existence. That's not straightforward. That's cruel. Robin Roberts finally stood up too. George, I think we need to take a break. We're not taking a break, George snapped at her. Sit down, Robin. The way he said it, the tone, the dismissiveness, it was the same way he'd been treating Chaka, like they were beneath him, like he was the only one who mattered. Don't you dare talk to her like that, Chaka said, pointing at George. Don't you dare talk to anyone like that. George stood up now too, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You know what? I've interviewed presidents. I've interviewed world leaders. I've interviewed people who actually matter, and none of them have ever been as difficult as you're being right now. There it was, the mask completely off. People who actually matter. The words hung in the air like poison. Michael Strahan stood up, putting himself slightly between George and Chaka. Yo, George, that's enough. That's way more than enough. Stay out of this, Michael, George said through gritted teeth. I'm not staying out of anything, Michael shot back. You're being completely out of line. Completely. Chaka Khan reached down and unclipped her microphone. The sound. Technician started to move forward, but she handed it to him gently, professionally. Thank you, she said to the tech. Then she looked at Robin and Michael. Thank you both for trying. She didn't look at George, didn't acknowledge him. She simply picked up her purse from beside her chair and started to walk toward the exit. That's when George made his final mistake. Running away? That's very on brand for you, isn't it? Chaka stopped, turned around, and when she spoke, every person in that studio would remember her words forever. I'm not running from anything. I'm walking away from disrespect. There's a difference. And the fact that you don't know that difference is exactly why you're standing there alone while your own colleagues are disgusted with you. She looked at Robin and Michael one more time. You two have always been the heart of this show. Don't let anyone take that away from you. And then she walked through the studio, past the cameras, past the crew, out the door, gone. The silence that followed was deafening. George stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Robin Roberts had tears in her eyes. Michael Strahan shook his head slowly, disappointment written all over his face. What? George finally said, looking around. What did I do? Robin Roberts removed her own microphone. If you have to ask that question, George, then you really don't understand what just happened here. We're going to commercial. Someone shouted from behind the cameras, going to commercial in 5, 4, 3, but before they could cut away, Michael Strahan spoke directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for what you just witnessed. That was not okay. That was not what Good Morning America stands for. The camera cut. The red lights went off. And George Stephanopoulos stood there in the middle of the studio, finally realizing that he'd just destroyed his reputation in front of millions of people. Robin Roberts walked off the set without saying another word to him. Michael Strahan followed her. The crew began packing up equipment, avoiding eye contact with George. Nobody wanted to be near him. In the hallway outside the studio, Chaka Khan was surrounded by staff members, not security escorting her out. Staff members apologizing, makeup artists apologizing, camera operators apologizing, production assistants apologizing. Everyone who had witnessed what happened felt compelled to tell her that she was right, that she deserved better, that George was completely out of line. Thank you. Chaka kept saying, thank you all, but I'm okay, really. I've dealt with worse than a man with an ego problem. One of the producers, a young woman in her 20s, was actually crying. Miss Khan, I'm so sorry. He had no right to speak to you that way. No right at all. Chaka hugged her. Actually hugged this young producer who she'd never met before that morning. Baby, don't cry over him. He's not worth your tears. You seem like you have a good heart. Don't let people like that change who you are. Back in the studio, George was in a heated argument with the executive producer. His voice carried down the hallway. She was being difficult. She wouldn't answer my questions. Your questions? The producer's voice was sharp. "George, you attacked her. You attacked her motherhood. You demanded she apologize for her life. That wasn't journalism. That was a hit job. I was trying to get real answers. You were trying to humiliate a legend, and you succeeded. Congratulations. You humiliated yourself instead." Robin and Michael had made their way to where Chaka was standing with the staff. Robin's professionalism had cracked, and she was wiping tears from her eyes. "Chaka, I am so deeply sorry. That should never have happened. Never." Chaka took Robin's hands in hers. "Sweetheart, you tried to stop it. You both did. That man has an issue, and it's not your responsibility to fix it. He's going to face consequences for this," Michael said firmly. "I'm going to make sure of it." That was beyond unprofessional. "Don't make this about revenge," Chaka said softly. "Make it about ensuring it never happens to anyone else. That's what matters." The wisdom in her words, the grace she was showing even after being attacked, made several people in the hallway start crying. Here was a woman who had every right to be furious, to be vindictive, to demand heads roll. And instead, she was comforting the people who felt guilty just for being in the room. Someone's phone buzzed, then another, then another. Social media was exploding. The interview had been live. Millions of people had watched the entire thing unfold in real time, and the reaction was unanimous. George Stephanopoulos had crossed every line. Chaka Khan was a hero for walking out. Robin and Michael were being praised for trying to intervene. A production assistant nervously approached the group. "Miss Khan, your car is here whenever you're ready, and your publicist is on the phone. She says every major outlet in the country is calling for a statement." Chaka smiled, that famous smile that had graced album covers for decades. "Tell them all the same thing. Tell them Chaka Khan came to Good Morning America to share her music and her joy. Tell them she was met with disrespect instead. Tell them she chose her dignity over a television appearance. And tell them she's just fine." "That's it?" the assistant asked. "That's it. Sometimes the simplest truth is the most powerful one." As Chaka prepared to leave, George appeared at the end of the hallway. He'd clearly been told she was still in the building. His face was pale, his earlier bravado completely gone. The executive producer was with him, along with 2 other network executives. "Chaka," George called out, "can we talk?" Everyone in the hallway tensed. Chaka turned slowly, taking in the sight of this man who'd just tried to destroy her on national television. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" "I think there was a misunderstanding," George started, and even he didn't sound convinced by his own words. "A misunderstanding?" Chaka's voice was dangerous now. "You understand perfectly well what you did. You planned it. You wanted to make yourself look tough by tearing me down, and it backfired. That's not a misunderstanding. That's consequences." One of the executives stepped forward. "Ms. Khan, on behalf of Good Morning America and ABC News, I want to offer our sincerest apologies. What happened in there was completely unacceptable." "Save your apologies," Chaka said calmly. "Actions matter more than words. The question is what you're going to do to make sure this never happens to another guest. Because if you think I'm the first person he's treated this way, you're fooling yourselves." "I'm just the first one who walked out." The executive nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. We will be conducting a full review." "Good." Chaka looked directly at George. "And you owe Robin and Michael an apology. You treated them like they were nothing, like their voices didn't matter. That's who you should be worried about, not me. I'm leaving. They have to work with you." George's face went from pale to red again. "They don't understand the pressure of conducting a live interview." "Pressure?" Michael Strahan's voice boomed. "Man, I played in the NFL. I know about pressure." "What you did today wasn't about pressure. It was about your ego," Robin added quietly. "We're supposed to be a team, George." "What you did today wasn't teamwork." George looked around at all the faces staring at him. Staff members, producers, his co-hosts. All of them looking at him with disappointment, disgust, or outright anger. No one was on his side. Not one person. "This is ridiculous," George muttered. But there was no strength behind the words anymore. "No," Chaka said firmly. "What's ridiculous is thinking you can treat people however you want because you have a platform. What's ridiculous is believing your title gives you the right to be cruel. What's ridiculous is standing here trying to justify the unjustifiable." She turned to the group of staff members who'd been so kind to her. "Thank you all. You made a bad situation bearable. That says everything about who you are." Then she looked at Robin and Michael. Keep being the good ones. Television needs people like you. And finally, she looked at the executives. Do better, be better, require better. That's all anyone can ask. Chaka Khan walked out of the Good Morning America studios with her head held high. Behind her, she left chaos. George Stephanopoulos standing alone in a hallway full of people who'd lost all respect for him. Executives scrambling to do damage control. Staff members talking in hushed, angry whispers about what they'd witnessed. But Chaka Khan herself? She was fine. She'd faced bigger demons than an insecure man with a microphone. She'd survived an industry that tried to break her 1,000 different ways. She'd overcome addiction, heartbreak, and every obstacle that life could throw at her. And she'd done it all while making music that moved souls. One unprofessional interview wasn't going to define her. She wouldn't let it. As her car pulled away from the building, Chaka looked out the window at the New York City skyline. Somewhere in that city, people were already talking about what happened. Somewhere, young women were watching clips online and learning that you don't have to accept disrespect just because someone has power. Somewhere, other journalists were having conversations about how to treat guests with dignity. George Stephanopoulos had tried to make himself look important by diminishing a legend. Instead, he'd given the world a masterclass in what not to do. He'd shown everyone watching exactly what happens when ego overrides empathy, when cruelty masquerades as journalism, when someone mistakes a platform for permission to destroy. Back in the studio, the remaining segments of Good Morning America continued without George. Robin and Michael handled everything with professionalism and grace, never once mentioning what had happened, but the energy was completely different. The warmth was gone. The chemistry was broken. During a commercial break, Michael turned to Robin. "That's it. I can't work with him anymore. I just can't." Robin nodded slowly. "I know. I feel the same way. What he did today, how he spoke to her, how he dismissed us when we tried to help, that's not who I want to be associated with." A producer overheard them. "You two were incredible today. The way you tried to redirect, the way you stood up for her. People are noticing. Social media is full of praise for both of you." "I don't care about praise," Robin said quietly. "I care that we just watched a colleague attack a guest and we couldn't stop it fast enough." "You tried," the producer said. "You both tried. That matters." But did it matter enough? That was the question hanging in the air. They'd tried to intervene, yes, but George had steamrolled right over them. What did that say about the power dynamics at the show? What did it say about who really had control? These were questions that would be asked in meeting rooms and boardrooms in the days to come. But in that moment, in that studio, the only thing that mattered was that Chaka Khan had walked out with her dignity intact. And George Stephanopoulos had revealed exactly who he was to millions of people watching at home. The rest of the show limped to its conclusion. Sponsors were already calling, concerned about being associated with the controversy. Other scheduled guests for later in the week were reconsidering their appearances. The network's phone lines were jammed with viewers calling to complain about George's behavior. In his dressing room, George sat alone, scrolling through social media, on his phone. Every comment was against him. Every tweet was calling him out. Every post was praising Chaka Khan for her strength and dignity. People were demanding he be fired. People were demanding he apologize. People were demanding accountability. He threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. How had this happened? How had an interview gone so completely wrong? In his mind, he'd been doing hard-hitting journalism. In reality, he'd been doing something else entirely, something ugly, something that couldn't be undone. The truth was simple, even if George couldn't see it yet. You can't build yourself up by tearing others down. You can't find respect through disrespect. You can't make yourself important by making others feel small. These were lessons that most people learn in childhood. But somehow, George Stephanopoulos had made it to the top of his profession without ever learning them. And Chaka Khan had just taught him. In front of the entire country, with grace, with strength, and with an unwillingness to accept less than she deserved. She'd taught everyone watching that walking away from toxicity isn't weakness. It's power. It's self-respect. It's knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. The Queen of Funk had walked out of Good Morning America, but in doing so, she'd walked straight into an even bigger place in people's hearts and minds. She'd become more than a musician in that moment. She'd become a symbol, a reminder, a lesson in how to stand up for yourself with dignity. George Stephanopoulos had wanted to make news that morning. He'd succeeded, just not in the way he'd intended. The news wasn't about Chaka Khan's past or her struggles or anything else he'd tried to extract from her. The news was about him, about his behavior, about his complete failure as an interviewer and as a human being in that moment. In just 29 seconds of questioning, he'd destroyed years of credibility. With just a few cruel comments, he'd shown his true colors. And Chaka Khan, with her decision to walk away, had held up a mirror that George would never be able to ignore.